less than 10 billion, about in the range of a matter of 4 or 5 years. But if you look at the broader context, China's trade with every other country almost going up by that big margin. David Emerson, when visiting China, complaining Canadian export to China last year lagging behind only about 2 or 3%. Australia managed to have 40% increase. The United States have 10%. As a matter of fact, China is having a huge trade volume, not only with Africa, but also with Latin America, with every other country you can think of in the world. I did some calculation, I don't have a chart here, based on China's custom statistics. In the past 4 or 5 years, the largest trade increase, we're talking about 300 or 400% here, is the largest is Middle East, followed by Africa, and then followed by Southeast Asian countries and then Latin America. But with Japan, with the United States, with Europe, with Australia, we're all talking about 20 to 30 to 40% range on an annual increase base. So there's some very interesting development in this, but the Chinese have cultivated the relations with Africa for many, many years. It's not something that started in the year 2000 and then began to jump. If you look at these figures, China last year, when Premier Wen Jiabao visited Africa, he said China put in almost $50 billion in the past 50 years in aiding Africa. And I was trying since then, after reading that report, trying to get a handle on exactly how they aided Africa. Well, most of these years, China was receiving other countries' aid. But nevertheless, that was an announcement. I was talking to Chinese sources. Nobody knows how the figure coming from. We're talking about from Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had a conference in Johannesburg last October in preparation for the China-Africa Summit. No Chinese experts at the spot could verify that. But you can see, I'm not going to repeat those. There's a range of packages China is doing, and more aid to come to China, from China to the African continent in terms of aid and investment packages. And this is actually before the last November China-Africa Summit. So these are the kind of relationship we're looking at very long, going back, maybe in the 1960s and 70s, more based on the brotherhood of revolutionary decolonialization, radicalism, which China itself was really promoting. But now, I think in post-1975 period, in the 1980s, China, through 1990s, through a bit of an adjustment process in this relationship with Africa, I think there is a renewed focus. Nevertheless, with China's own development process, now China look out at Africa because its own internal process is very much de-emphasizing ideology, and therefore its relationship with Africa is more pragmatic. It's more thinking in terms of what China can get from Africa, in terms of resources, in terms of energy. Of course, they will repeat all these traditional slogans of friendship and this and that. Foreign Affairs University, under Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has been training foreign African diplomats for years. I mean, quietly. They pay for everything, and they come, they spend, a couple of months, they send them home. These are young diplomats, and so if you go around Africa, and you will talk to these diplomats, they're telling you very different stories about how African governments feel about China, in contrast to what you read from the Western press, which has been quite interesting. Of course, there is this China-Africa Summit. I calculated with different packages of cancellation of debts, with promised investments, with different packages of aid, China in the next 5 to 10 years is about to put in $10 billion into African continent. And so far, just to put in context, China has about $7 billion invested in Africa, and the trade volume is in the neighborhood about 40 billion. I mean, US is doing about $95 billion a year. So we're still looking at the big picture, is the United States. But you can see that where China is coming, saying, okay, now it's 40 billion, targeting doubling that or more by 2010 for 100 billion. So remember the $100 billion mark, that's everywhere in China's relations with other parts of the world. It's trade with Latin America sitting at about $50 billion a year. They say, let's double it by 2010. They have $100 billion mark trade volume with ASEAN countries. They say, let's double that by 2010 for 200 billion. They have 200 billion bilateral trade with Japan. They say, let's increase that and doubling that in the next 5 to 10 years. You can get very confused by just saying wherever they go, they're going to say doubling the trade. And they actually do double that. Unbelievable. And if you look up at the track record in the past 10 years, it just happened. And this is, China is coming. There's no doubt about it. Let me look at here the second point on the China's domestic development, economic growth, and especially its focus in recent years on energy. I think that provides you a bit of a background, and then I'll mention maybe the third and fourth point later. Okay, so these are some of the figures for those who have not followed China very closely. We're looking at China's trade from coming nowhere into very, very high. That's 2004 figure. It's already old. China attracts the largest amount of foreign investment in the world, surpassing the United States. Again, the new figure is, I think, is up there. Last year, China attracted about 80 billion US dollars foreign investment. China has the largest trading goods and services. Its ratio to GDP, China is very high. That means China depending on foreign trade very much, and many of those trade, 6% of China's foreign trade being produced by foreign nationals, foreign multinationals. Here, a number of indicators showing where China is, if you call it a ascending dragon in terms of energy. It is the second largest energy consumer, but also produced the second place energy as well. Second largest power market. By 2009, the latest estimate, China is going to overtake the United States as the largest CO2 emitter in the world. Although in accumulative volumes of CO2, China really is at 1/3 of US total, maybe 1/6 of OECD countries. On a per capita basis, China is much less. But nevertheless, the global warming effect goes with the larger volumes, and China is the mass there. So pollution and all the other figures here. On the energy in particular side, China used to, up to the turn of the century, China used to produce more GDP with less energy, and that a decisive turn. Now China consume more energy and produce less GDP. And China turned from 1993 from an oil exporter into a pure importer, and the volume has been growing very, very fast. And talking about oil demand, put in context of China and India, and we're looking at China consuming about 7 million barrels a day, and India much, much less. And that means a lot of room for India to catch up. And China, of course, now consumes, in comparison with the United States, which consumes 20 million barrels a day. That's 1/4 of the world total. Then China has a lot of room to catch up with the United States. And to put in the context later, I'll come back. It's just amazing that how the whole picture is shaping up. And China plus and India, look at the world, and China and India combined is still consuming that amount. And think about when every Chinese and every Indian wants to live the lifestyle of a Canadian, of a North American, what will happen? And China's share for world demand on major metals, materials, extremely high. Because its current economic structure and scale is all heavy industry as a factory of the world rather than high tech, which consumes less energy. So the net imports of oil will